morning. How's everybody doing today?
Hello? Really?
And welcome,
Really?
welcome to Lifestyle Business. I'm Chris.
And I'm Anne. And today we are so excited to bring to our show our friend and an inspiring leader, Laís de Oliveira. As a longtime entrepreneur, expert, global community builder, culture curator, and author, Laís believes that the world needs a new approach to building communities, one based on authentic relationships, genuine trust, and a true sense of belonging. In other words, current approaches to community building must be hacked. And lucky for us, she's here to crack the code, and we're going to bring her on in a few more minutes. But we've been wondering how everyone's been doing this week.
Everybody seems to be in a pretty good mood this week. I don't know about everybody else, but I know our pod, the text message thread, was blowing up
yesterday.
A lot of people in good spirits.
A lot of good spirits. A lot of breakfast wine, it seemed like, toasting each other as they watched the inauguration. So we have
dry January must be over for some folks.
For some people,
we're still cranking away.
dry weekdays. It was the inauguration yesterday.
Yeah. Ooh, can we close that chapter yet?
It just closed. No, super exciting news. So wonderful to have a final transition. And I know a lot of people are pretty excited about the future.
Yeah. Future's looking bright.
There were there were a lot of tears yesterday, which is nice because there were also a lot of tears 4 years ago, but they were tears of joy and relief. So there we go.
Right.
You don't seem to be jumping in on the inauguration talks. It sounds like you got some things on your mind. You got some PPP loans you're submitting for? Let's get into it.
Let's get down to business. Everybody's had enough political talk. But, speaking of politicians, the PPP loan number 2 process is open, and we want to make sure our audience is aware of that. Opened last week for community banks and banks that serve sort of underserved communities. So they got a head start since there was a little bit of a challenge with that rollout last time. And
we had a few discussions this weekend about PPP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think,
it was interesting.
Thank goodness. We need it. Everybody else needs it. There is an added benefit in this PPP loan for restaurants and service industry. So they get a little bump. So that's good. All of the hard hit businesses.
Yeah. And it was interesting. We were having this conversation around PPP, and there was a perception that those who needed it most did not receive it last time. And in fact, not that I'd like to correct people, of course, but it was nice to be able to remind folks that actually, as though there are many inefficiencies, of course, through any government processes and things that were happening, we were reflecting on how fast it went out. Mm-hmm. And also that ultimately at the end of the day, most people who did need it and were eligible for it were able to get it. And so what's interesting about it this time is there is a requirement to demonstrate business challenge, downturn.
Yeah. Lost revenue from 2019 to 2020, to be very clear.
So probably those law firms that were able to be eligible for it last time around, not so eligible this time. But
and to be clear, eligible for forgiveness. Anybody can get the loan. The forgiveness part, you have to have a 25% drop in revenue during any quarter from 2019 to 2020. You need to be able to demonstrate that. So that's the forgiveness component.
Yeah. So good news.
Good news. We also talked to a DC insider
who shall remain nameless.
Are
we remaining nameless?
Yes, remaining nameless. If we call somebody a DC insider, that means they have to be nameless.
Nameless.
Yeah.
So tell us what we heard.
Who said that they are anticipating probably 2 more, a recovery package and a stimulus package coming down with the new administration and new Congress. So hopefully some continued support for the businesses that are just hanging on by a thread. We know a few, but hanging on, keep cockroaching. You can make it. You can make it.
If we can make it, you can make it.
Yeah.
No,
anyway, having
true.
a lot of those conversations with Launchpad members and organizations that are just hunkered down.
And
right?
DC insiders makes us sound so insidery.
Yeah. Right.
But
I was in Stockton yesterday.
yes.
That was fun to get back to Stockton. And we checked out the new podcast studio in Launchpad Stockton. The first floor, there's signage hanging up. It's clean and ready to go, ready to be open. Not quite open because we're still under
Shelter in
place orders. And so the membership spaces upstairs are open. The open to the public space downstairs is not yet open, but we're getting ready, and we'll be ready as soon as we are allowed to be open.
That's right. We are very excited about opening up the downstairs space to be much more of a community centric space. So a little different than our offices upstairs, maybe a lower price point so that people who need to have that professional meeting space have access to it. But we're really excited because we're launching the podcast studio. And so we're working on that right now. This was something that has been in the works for many months. We're excited about it. And I think it's going to be a really important community resource for Stockton. And I was just tweeting with the former mayor, Mayor Tubbs, and he was talking about how important it was for us to be able to offer resources to our local media. And so I think
you're
the
talking
podcast,
to DC insiders, you're tweeting with
former mayors, Mayor Tubbs.
You got the inside track covered.
But we are excited to make that downtown space the core and the heart of Stockton's entrepreneurial community. And so I can't wait for us to open. I can't wait for us all to go back to normal. But nonetheless, that will be an amazing resource that we are ready to bring to Stockton.
Yeah, and all of our other locations as well. Podcast studios and broadcasting and working virtually, combined with hopefully at some point working back together in person, is part of the future of work. Speaking of the future of work, I got questions about building community. I'm excited to talk to Lais, but we've been talking to a lot of people about sort of the hybrid model, how you're going back to work. Do you think you can build relationships with people online through this medium when we're talking, or do you think this medium is more about reinforcing existing relationships? Do you think we need to get back to being together in person to continue to sort of build relationships?
I think there is something to be said about in-person relationship building and a way of physically connecting. I don't think as a company. So I think where this medium can work is that it can extend and connect the existing relationships that we already have. So for example, with Lais, we normally are not in the same city anyway. So we get to meet up from time to time at conferences or events, but this is an opportunity where we can actually continue a real, live, authentic relationship and get a chance to stay connected that way. But I do think the idea of having that physical presence, the person at the coffee machine to say hi to. Mm-hmm. But we were talking to our friend Adam, who works at a startup in San Francisco, and he's sort of saying his office, he thrives in the in-office community. Adam, if we were going to have a character of the future of work, Adam would be the guy that would be like, I need to go to the office. I like to be with my team. I like to do a little jawing and have a coffee and grab a little bit of lunch. And he does not thrive in the in-home experience. Mm-hmm. So I think he has said this, I need to go back to the office. Now, his company is not going back to the office on a regular basis. So he's like, well, then what I need to do. If there were
a physical location, he could go and work with other people around, even if they didn't work for the same company.
And that's exactly what he's saying. He's like, but I don't have to do the commute to San Francisco, I'd be happy to go to a cool co-working space, but then I would care who was actually working at that co-working space.
Yeah.
Because they become his new colleagues for the day-to-day culture building.
Right.
But he will then still need to convene with his company and his team in an offline world. And I think that that's not going away, but I think how we imagine that for the future is going to be different.
Yep.
But that's my 2 cents for it right now.
All right. Well, let's bring in an expert.
Let's bring in an expert and see what Lais has to tell us.
You want to bring her in?
I do. And now, with over 10 years of experience in building communities for global organizations and playing a grassroots role in the development of the Malaysian startup ecosystem, Lais is an expert in hacking communities. And she's here today to share highlights from her personal entrepreneurial journey, as well as give us insights from her new book, Hacking Communities, a practical guide on community building based on Lais's many years of experience from both the private and public sectors that has spanned across multiple contents. Lais.
Wow.
How are
What
you?
an introduction.
Oh,
I'm so pleased to be here. It's like, oh my God, this is so important. And these people are so enthusiastic. You feel like actual TV hosts right now. TV show
yeah.
hosts.
I mean, we
I'm
play them
impressed.
right now on the internet.
Yeah.
We play actual TV hosts on a podcast.
Yeah, you'll break the internet very soon, I'm sure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Maybe you can help us hack our way to breaking the internet.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's my goal, but we can talk about that thing you were talking about just now. About
Sounds
I was
good.
actually
What
like
are you doing?
itching
Where
to
are
get-
you?
I'm in Brazil right now. So the pandemic got me moving back to my country, where I was born. And I have been abroad for 10 years. And in 2019, I came to attend a tech conference. And while I was getting my visa ready to move to Portugal, the COVID-19 pandemic decided to hit the world. So I actually had already been on a movement back home since 2018 when I left Malaysia. Last time I met you in New Orleans, it was actually 2018 itself. I had just left Malaysia. And then 2019, I was here by the end of the year. 2020, I moved to a farm, like literally a farm. For the whole last year, I lived in a farm in the countryside of Brazil. Yep. I raised chickens, and I love my chickens, I need to say. I miss them. And then 2021 found me living in the southern part of Brazil by the beach. I had to leave my farm, which was a shock and unexpected. And I miss my chickens, but now I'm in the southern part of Brazil. It's a long story, but long story short, I'm in Brazil.
Are you happy to be at the beach?
Oh, I mean, I love being by the beach. And in fact, for those who do not know this, I'm in Florianopolis, which is one of Brazilian's most brightest startup ecosystems. We even have a bridge that resembles the Bay Bridge. So we have that like Californian touch in here. So it's a place with mountains and beaches. It's beautiful. So it has a little bit of everything for every taste. I love this. So I love being here. And everyone, you should visit Florianopolis.
Maybe we should go.
We should go. Absolutely. As soon as we can.
And I have a new puppy here waiting for you to greet you with happiness and love. So you should come and visit.
And our daughter Harper loves chickens, so she would.
Well, she can't because she's
she
moved
would like
away
to
from her
be-
chickens.
I know she would like to be back up at the farm.
We can go visit my chickens. They
Yeah.
will be happy.
That's great. Well, I can't. I would like to go to Brazil right now.
Yes, if you're welcome.
So let's dig in. And you just released the book. Tell us a little bit about that process. I mean, this is 10 years of doing this. And so what made you decide to write the book, and what can people find inside, and why should they buy it?
Yeah. So hacking communities is a process of me finding out that I'm a community builder before I knew that that was a thing even. By the way, the puppy is crying. This is Boozy. I need to show the puppy right now because she's
Show
crying.
me the puppy. Oh, look at that.
Yeah, and she's Boozy. No, come here. Anyway, so hacking communities started as a journey of me building communities before I even knew that was a thing. That was I started really in 2017, roughly started leading an NGO across 3 countries, 2,000 volunteers, without even knowing what I was doing. And when I moved to Malaysia, I just can share the fact that within 6 months of being there, I was working for the Malaysian government, connecting Malaysia to Southeast Asia startup ecosystem. And all of that happened really fast. And the process in which that happened was by bringing people together recurrently through diverse types of events, what I call design of interactions today. So in a nutshell, you guys should drink more coffee. I'm having actually and so basically what happened is that I decided to put in one book a set of frameworks and guidelines that led me to create serendipity around me, that led me to work for the Malaysian government within 6 months of living in Malaysia. And I'm a random Brazilian who lands in Malaysia and suddenly is working for their government. And then I started my own business, got it acquired, and all this series of things that happened, which eventually led me to meet you in New Orleans and join Startup Genome as their community development director. I decided to put it down in a book. And that decision was made first in 2014. I thought I would write an article called Hacking Communities. But then I thought it was just too soon, not yet. And then in 2018, as I decided to leave Malaysia, I said, I need to share the story of how it happened with the world. And I had created frameworks that I had been using to help people. And every time I shared my frameworks, people would be mind blown and super happy and grateful. So I decided writing it down as a handbook. But in the process of writing, I figured it was more of a spiritual guide than anything else. So I divided the book in part 1, where I share a little bit of like the mindset, the core values, everything you need in order to build a community. And part 2 is more of practical guide, including frameworks, models that help people engineering serendipity, designing interactions that build trust and scale, building collective relationships, and scaling communities, in making sure that you eventually grow obsolete, and whichever communities you build will grow beyond you, which is basically what happened with the communities I've created in Malaysia. So that's it in a nutshell. Hacking Communities is a set of principles, values, and frameworks to help anyone building a community from scratch to scaling it. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. And I love the thing that you say, which I think is so relevant, regardless of whether you're working on community, you're building a business, you're trying to do anything. It's success is defined when it can grow without you. Mm-hmm. And so the idea of, you create the framework, you create the foundation, you activate the energy in the community around you, but you become obsolete, right? You ultimately fire yourself because now the community can self-sustain and flourish. And I think of that in leadership. I think of that when you're running a business. If you're a small business owner, getting to the point where you can actually fire yourself is a definition of success. And I think that's really powerful. And
I must comment on that if I can, but just because when we think about things outgrowing us, this is what everybody wants, right? We find it's an amazing concept. But when it finally happens, what most of us see when we start to grow obsolete is that we lose identity. And this is what I found as a community builder. Most of us want our community to outgrow ourselves, but I have seen it in multiple cases when the community builder has a midlife crisis, when their community decides that they are no longer that important. And that ability to let go and be abundance-minded and think that the baby is above you or above your identity and that the community can grow even if you're not present is more important than in community building than if you're building a business where you're always going to be like the CEO somehow. So holding on to power does not really work for scaling organic grassroots communities. Instead, most likely, the better way to survive and have your name continuing to be remembered and praised is actually by letting go. It's actually by trusting and empowering people and giving away your power and trusting people to speak on your behalf. So that kind of abundance mindset, which is required for a community builder, is required from the beginning for you to start a community so that you give before you take, but it's also required for you to finalize it and let grow, which is why abundance is one of the core values I have defined for a community leader. There's other 2 core values I can talk about later.
That's amazing. That's so helpful. So we've got a question from the audience, from Dio. Any lessons learned in creating communities when there are profound difference between people, viewpoints, feelings, etc.?
Yeah, Dayo, thank you for this question, which is super relevant today, right? I think this is the point of community building. I think that the whole point of community building is finding home outside of our original home. And this is why community building has even become a thing. So I'm going to start with saying this. The reason why community building has become so important in the current age, this is my opinion, but it's an educated opinion, I would dare say, because I've been researching a lot about this. The reason why community building is important again, even though it's an ancient science, it's because now we have to reinvent communities. We have grown free to belong anywhere, thanks to technology, thanks to mobility. And what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic is that while we are still free to belong anywhere, we're also forced to commit to a place for longer term. I'm going to get to your question right away, but I'm giving this background to explain the beauty of community building in the current world is exactly finding a home where we do not look like the same, we do not think the same. It's figuring out that we belong not in our original place, and that requires deconstructing yourself, becoming the foreigner, and finding identity in people that did not look like you or did not think like you in the beginning. So becoming the foreigner is a key step to building true authentic communities where we find belonging based on values we share, even though we might have in the surface different opinions, different ideas of how things should be done. And there's a ton of indication of how diversity, not only of like gender diversity, ethnical diversity, background diversity, diversity of ideologies as well, can build better companies because we have better discussions and make better decisions. There's a study by McKinsey that proves that, called Why Diversity Matters, and that shows that companies that have more diversity in the top quartile of their executive teams, they would have 25 to 35% more financial returns. So in a nutshell, I think the only point of building communities is in groups where we have diverse feelings, viewpoints, and outlooks about the world. And the way to build that is in practice by designing interactions that build trust over time. Building communities is like building relationships. You don't make friends in the first time you see someone if you never see them again. The role of a community builder is to make sure people build trust over time. And you can do that with people who, in the surface, look and think differently. I hope I answered your question, Dayo, but we can talk ages about this.
Yeah, Dio and Lais need to meet. Two worlds colliding.
Lais, I have a question for you, and it was sort of I was watching the video that you produced around the book, and it's around the connection of sort of community building and the importance of community and all of the connectivity we have through our mobile devices and online and the internet, but also this epidemic of loneliness, right? And probably exacerbated by the pandemic, but not necessarily, that's not the only thing causing it, right? In some ways, we're more connected than ever, but we're not finding fulfillment in our relationships with people we know on the screen or on social media. There's something maybe even corrosive about social media in the way it sort of trains our brains. So can you talk about sort of, how you build an authentic community to combat the loneliness that we see today?
Wow, this is a big question, Chris. I have to divide that into a few parts. So let me start with this. There is no data indicating yet, and this is super interesting, that we actually grew lonelier from the pandemic. We got isolated. But actually there was, I'll bring this later for maybe as an output of this for those who are interested. But I did research this recently, and although there is no indicative data yet because we have not been isolated for too long, we are more isolated, but not necessarily lonelier since the pandemic started, which is super interesting. So that's just the first part. We don't know yet. We were lonelier before. In 2018, the UK launched the Ministry of Loneliness. And loneliness is more, the Minister of Loneliness actually, under the Ministry of, I forgot right now, apology, but I'll bring that data later. Then what happened actually during the pandemic that we isolated ourselves, but we kept the that sense of belonging, being free to belong anywhere. So loneliness is about exactly fitting in. What most of us spend a lifetime doing is trying to fit in, and that's the second concept I want to bring. So the first is that we don't know if we actually got lonelier during the pandemic. The second is explaining loneliness. There's a lot of science and studies behind it, but what I want to bring for the purpose of this conversation is that loneliness is about not being able to be your true self. Loneliness is about feeling that if I am in here right now and I'm not, there's no one to, like no one's getting my back, no one has my back. If a lion jumps from behind a bush, I'm gonna die. If I'm alone and naked, as a human is, and facing a harsh winter, if no one is here to feed me or cuddle with me, I'm gonna die. So loneliness is about this biological indicative that we need to belong in order to feel safe. So it's about feeling safe. And as we've learned from several American high school movies like Mean Girls and Clueless and so on, we are not necessarily feeling together and feeling safe in environments where there's a ton of people, like high schools where we have so hard to fit in order to be part and be accepted and feel safe. And we do not actually feel safe because fitting in, as described by Brené Brown, is about pretending to be something you are not, just for the sake of being part of. And it's not true. True belonging comes from daring to be vulnerable, daring to show yourself as who you truly are. And that requires building safe spaces where people can feel like their truest selves and act like their truest selves. And that's when we do not feel lonely. In a nutshell, I can feel lonely in a crowd, and I can feel together in a virtual world. So we can talk later, maybe in another set of answering this, about how to create safe spaces. But just to go back to answering your question, one last point, the third point I wanted to bring, since I said 3 points, it's about Elizabeth Redkay. I forgot which, she's a neuroscientist. I forgot from which university. My mind is not working today, so sorry for that. I'll recall all this data later. But Elizabeth Redkay, neuroscientist, study that offline encounters do enhance oxytocin, which is the feel-good hormone that generates a lot of, that boosts our immune system and has a lot of positive effects in our body. So oxytocin is released by touch. Only a high five can release oxytocin. Eye-to-eye contact can release oxytocin. So it's true that offline connections do connect people in a deeper way, more in a deeper way than virtual connections. But what we have not studied yet, at least I'm not aware of, and if anyone listening to this is aware of this, please let me know, is if an eye-to-eye connection can itself release oxytocin. And my wild guess is that yes, it can. Because I joined On Deck, which is basically an online community during the pandemic, and I was feeling lonely at my farm with my chickens and my friends, but I was feeling lonely. And joining On Deck and meeting a bunch of creative people, entrepreneurial people, founders from all over the world online made me feel safer, happier, together, even though I had met all these people online. So I believe, and we need those studies coming in, so scientists, neuroscientists, let's get on. We need to figure out if eye-to-eye online connection can boost itself oxytocin, which is a feel-good hormone that can increase longevity. For instance, there's a study by Susan Pinker that proves that. So I know that that's a long answer. Sorry, because you asked me a complicated question. But in a nutshell, social isolation does not necessarily imply loneliness. But yes, offline connections tend to create more oxytocin between people, which is a hormone that boosts our immune system and also creates trust and bonding between people.
Well, that ruined my next question.
Why?
Which was,
Anyway.
yeah, I'm going to ask it anyway, which is, I think and you basically explained it's oxytocin, which is how do we recreate in a virtual world those in-person magic moments, right? That magic connection that you make with someone and you immediately know we will continue to be like our friendship. We sat down, we were like, oh, we get this, right? We started, by the way, our journey started in Portugal at Ecosystem Summit when I put you on the panel.
2017.
investors. That's right.
Yeah.
And so you have these moments where you meet, and then you're like, oh, this is a connection or a relationship that will stand the test of time. How do you create those in the virtual world?
Yeah. I would like to be very practical here, since I've been talking a lot of like theoretical stuff in the previous questions. So I was gonna say, I joined this fellowship, basically an online community where we get to meet other people on a virtual basis through recurring events. So it's called On Deck. For those who want to check, it's beyonddeck.com. And I joined their founders fellowship. I did join because I was looking for serendipity, which I missed. My life was filled with serendipity in my past. And suddenly I was thrown in a farm, even though I loved, as I've mentioned them many times, my chickens. And I had a bunny as well, who just showed up and materialized out of thin air. I don't know where that bunny came from. But I was just alone and feeling like I needed to exchange ideas with people who were entrepreneurial. And I was missing that bunch of serendipity that I gained when I went to Web Summit and met people like Anne. When I went to Collision and met people like Anne and Mark. And when I went to Startup Grind Global and met people like Cortland and Derek. And in a nutshell, I was missing that. So I joined On Deck because they told me it's basically an amazing group of founders looking for the next thing. And with that, I was basically joining sessions that were socials, icebreakers, fireside chats, workshops, and I was put on a Slack group with a bunch of random people who I'd never seen before. Just that I found later they were not random, they were curated. And Dio, I've been in Clubhouse as well. It's been amazing. Also, I've had an amazing experience there so far. And basically, I've been meeting people on a consistent basis. And the more I met some people, the more I engaged with someone, the more I would decide to have another conversation with them. And that design of interactions, and I would repeat that word, design of interactions, that caused me to meet people recurringly, created that sense of trust and bonding, which I felt with you and back in time. Because I would meet someone once, see them at an event, then again, there would be another event, I would see that face again. And then at the third event, we said, okay, we should catch up. Then we had a one-on-one. Then we had an excuse to have a next meeting. And this, in essence, is what builds relationships. Like, I'm going to give the example I give when I talk about hacking communities. Like, you don't get married with someone you just met at a bar, unless likely that if you're in Las Vegas or something and you drank a little bit. But usually you don't do that. What happens is that you meet someone and then you have an excuse to meet again. And then let's grab coffee, let's go for movies, let's go for a walk, let's take a trip together. You continue to engage. So the more you interact with someone, the more likely you are to build a relationship or trust, which is why our best friends tend to be those from work or those from college or those with whom we shared memorable moments of our lives. So sharing moments with people, sharing interactions recurringly is what builds relationships. How do you do that in the online world? I think On Deck actually cracked the code of community building online, because I do feel like I made friends. And I found people that I just want to hang out with and grab coffee with online, and I trust them. To the point, I have a meeting with someone from On Deck, and in the minute I start a meeting, I'm like, I just need to share with you that I'm just not feeling okay. And we start talking about my life instead of talking about the job we had to talk about. So I was able to create trust and vulnerability in an online basis based on recurring interactions. So I don't know if that serves as a practical insight to all of you, but the key to everything is relevance and consistency. Relevance is, why are we meeting? What do we share? For instance, at On Deck, we share the idea that, we are both people who are active, entrepreneurial, and we want to do something great that we don't know what it is. At the case of the Founders Fellowship. And meeting them recurringly builds sharing common experiences, creates that sense of trust that makes you feel like you belong. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's great. It was interesting. There was a comment in the audience around Clubhouse, and I just popped in to a friend of mine. Actually, I would say an online friend of mine, because obviously, oftentimes we have like a Twitter group of friends that we've never met in person, but we share similar values and perspectives. But she was hosting a very casual catch up, and it was really interesting. I lurked. I didn't actually engage. It was very interesting to pop in and to hear sort of just this open dialogue of chatting and sharing and perspectives and questions. And it was just, it was a really interesting thing. It's almost like you're listening to like a radio show or a call-in show, but it wasn't topical. It was just really a catch up. And I was like, oh, it was a really nice forum in these times where I was really surprised by how kind of trusted and engaged the conversation was.
And what I love about Clubhouse is actually that there is, everyone's saying that the future is audio. Podcasts are really growing right now. You're starting one, so you know that really well. And what I loved about Clubhouse is that, I don't know, there is something which has to be studied, by the way, but there's something intuitively that feels good in listening to other humans. I feel like they're around me. There is something that is more touching and heartwarming than reading when you listen. So that's what I think. They made something really outstanding, and I think it's only going to grow. More communities like those will grow. It's really impressive. I've been actually discovering a lot of good people in there as well.
It's interesting.
Yeah, we had a guest on, Andrew Berkowitz, who is a podcast producer, and
Andrew.
He talked a lot about the intimacy of, you have an earbud, it's right inside your ear, it's sort of touching you, and you hear somebody's voice. It's just a very, intimate, format to have. And you may be out, going for a walk or doing something. It just, it's a very, powerful way to connect with people.
Yeah, I love that idea. But you feel that even though you don't know the science behind it, it's like listening to someone creates a bond, which is deeper than if you read them.
Yeah. So we're talking a little bit about, we've talked about virtual world. One of the things that I think is interesting is that communities have a life cycle, right? Just like all of us, just like companies. And sometimes communities falter. Maybe they stagnate or they plateau. How do you suggest you go back in to kind of recreate the magic or breathe energy and enthusiasm into a community, whether it's in person, it doesn't have to be in person or online, just in general, help communities kind of find their next peak?
Yeah, I don't think there's a magic formula to this. That really depends on what happened to this community. And usually what would happen as communities grow is that you would, I think of those numbers by Dunbar's numbers, that the guy who made up that idea of like the maximum number a human can have in his close network is 150. I actually created a model of closeness circles in hacking communities that takes his numbers as an example. And what I think is that communities should grow like fractals, and to keep intimacy and that sense of closeness. This is why I think many communities decide to grow in chapters. And I chose even to use the metaphor of plants. You know those dandelions that you blow and they have those flying seeds? I use that as a metaphor for community growth, because what happens is that you empower every single person in your community to spread your core. And if you had done a good job in the beginning and everyone shares your values, it's likely that it will grow in a consistent way where other members will grow, and wherever they go, they will spread your core, your seed. And that grows through capitula, which is basically chapter. That's how those plants grow. So I think that's just the perfect metaphor. And what happens sometimes when communities grow too massive, so that's one hypothesis. The community is boring or is dead because it grew too big. And it lost relevance. So first I felt like I belonged, I was special, and now I'm just another one. So that's one hypothesis of why what you're saying happened, out of many. In that case, I think that what you gotta do and what I would do, and I'm not giving anyone a magic formula, please, but I'm just giving an insight of an example of what could happen, is bring back the magic of closeness by identifying, if I'm having, for instance, a community that had 100 people and grew really fast to 10,000 people. Let's make that example up. And it lost its magic because it's not as special anymore. Who are your most active 1,000 members? How can you create layers of intimacy between the first 100, the first 1,000. I mean, yeah, I got my. It's not a human puppy, but I got my puppy here that's crying on sometimes as well, so I can relate. And then, so basically, how can you create those layers of closeness and empower, not instead of you to many, empower people to represent you and help create those bundles of intimacy. So instead of having a community of 10,000 people, maybe you have multiple communities that keep high relevance, keep depth by identify themselves with, like, maybe amongst this 10,000, some people want to talk about, so it depends on what your community is about, but you always can find bubbles of relevance, topics that are more relevant to some of them more than to others. So it is important that you find those leaders inside your community that help you creating bubbles of relevance in which there is higher commonalities between people within, because it's very hard to find commonalities across 10,000 people. So my first advice would be, how can you create layers and empower people from within, which are likely, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I feel like, okay, which are likely your first 100 and your most active 1,000, and create these layers of commitment where you communicate more with people who are amongst the core group, and then these people help communicate with the others, and you basically empower people within your community to create intimacy across. So in a nutshell, first step I would suggest is create layers of commitment and create bubbles of relevance where people feel again like it's cozy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Our
Harper's here. She's like, yes.
Harper.
A practical example in my experience when we started a first community organization in New Orleans back in sort of the early days of the entrepreneurial community there, we had one meetup group called Net Squared, and that was sort of the one meetup group. And as that grew and grew and grew, there were all of these sort of splinter off, a coder group, women in tech, different sort of meetup groups, and they all, it was, people found more and more sort of, as the community grew, more and more sort of niche interests that connected them and that they wanted to focus on. And all of these groups were sort of together under one umbrella, but people really spent time in sort of the niche community that they wanted to focus on, and that allowed the whole thing to grow.
Yeah. Sorry, Chris, can you hear me? Because I felt like my voice was breaking just a little bit.
No, we can hear you. It's fine. Yeah, no change.
Amazing. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a good. I could get the essence of your example. I think this is actually is, and this is just one of the ways in which a community can die. Another way is that it dies by negligence, right? Hey, hello, Harper.
Hi, Lais.
Hey, pretty girl.
Okay.
Oh my God. So the best part of the story is that I met you guys before Harper. It's lovely to see the seeds growing out of this community of two of yours.
Yeah. All right. Well, we did want to ask you one more question, Lais. I'll go ahead and ask it, specifically around community building and the online offline nature. We're interested in this topic of the community, of the future of work right now, and obviously from our standpoint, running a co-working space, we've already sort of bought into this idea that your work community doesn't necessarily have to be your business colleagues. You can have a work community that is people you work around every day and you have a coffee with and you share interests with, but you can be working on different things. I'm curious now with the pandemic and the separation, just physically that we're feeling, when people come back to work and we may be going to work in new ways, not necessarily, a lot of companies won't go back to their offices, but people might come back to a co-working space or be working from home. How do you see the future of, working together from a connection and community standpoint, do you see sort of a hybrid of online and offline? Do you see, time where we're building relationships, like companies that come together on quarterly retreats or things that are really focused on an intentionality about relationship building? Where do you see this intersection of community with the future of the way we'll all be working together?
Yeah, I love what you said about your work community being not only the community of your direct workers, but the community of professionals that you can learn from. So I think that the emergence of things like now in my work, the company I just joined, we are people from all over the world working 100% remote. And as you said, our encounters will be 100% intentional. This is true for companies, and I think for office spaces. Office spaces and even residences are more intentional right now. They are places where we go, I mean, not homes, but homes, they have a different actually aspect, but more like commercial spaces, office space and retail. They are places where we go with a purpose, looking for an experience. And I no longer go to the office because I need access to internet or a desk. I go because I have a bonding session with a team. I go because I want to plan the strategy for the year, and that requires a physical meeting. So I think there is more intentionality around the places where we work from. There is more requirement for it to offer an experience beyond just being physical. That's one. And I think this will highly affect the real estate industry, especially co-working spaces. They will understand, they have been understanding that for a long time already. Co-working spaces of all the office space understood that experience and community matters, right? So I think that's one. One, your community will be beyond your own work community. So, and also you build more international relationships, and encounters will become more intentional. And on that first note, one of the things that also is happening right now is that we are digitalizing the world faster than we thought we would. That requires learning faster. That requires learning in community. So part of the success of what we're building for now, for example, now I joined OnDeck's fellowship as a founder, and now I'm building their community builders fellowship, and there's someone else building a podcasters fellowship and someone else building a course creators fellowship. And we need those communities of professionals, as you said, beyond our company, because we need to learn faster. The world is changing too fast, and there's no other way to learn other than by learning from those who are learning as well, and learning as we go from other people. So this is, I think, the future of work is learning in networks, collaboration to an extreme point where we learn from people who maybe before we would understand that as competitors, but now if we find that thing that startup ecosystems found before, that openness and sharing information and a fluid flow of knowledge is the best way to accelerate ecosystem development. And I think this we brought to every industry in this era.
That's fascinating. I think that's a really important point there about the collaboration with people who are focused on building, creating similar things, and from a role base, that might not be somebody within your company. That might be a colleague or somebody in a community that you find online. And things are moving so fast. You do need that continuous learning. And
those who do not share will just stay behind. And the beauty of it is that startup communities, like Andy Saxenian wrote a book about this, I think 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The Original Advantage. And Curb Genome did research about local connectedness and global connectedness 5 years ago. And now the world is just learning that, oh, great. So if I share more, if I give more, I gain more, because the world is changing so fast I can't follow. Startup communities understand this from the get-go, but not every industry does. And now everyone is understanding this.
And that notion, that sort of central value of give first, of openness and sharing, like you said, that startup communities have embraced. We're going to all be embracing that. Yeah.
That's awesome.
All right.
I've been
And also,
laughing.
I think that even explains why suddenly community building is a thing. It's because what we call community building is a lot of what we've been experiencing in startup communities, in the good ones, right? And it's just the idea of like, back to the abundance mindset. Why wouldn't I help someone grow if I could? So we see that in Stockholm. We see that in London. We see that in San Francisco. Well, not as much. As communities grow, as you know, it gets complex. But it was there in the beginning of many great and bright startup ecosystems. And I think the world is learning that this is actually a good way to grow a business and to develop an economy. So I hope we learn that community building may be a good way to grow from now on.
Absolutely. And I think that is a really important and salient topic that we often are shouting from the rooftops, which is one of the challenges that we face in communities is because sometimes they are regional based, and you can get this sort of level of competition that happens within. But at the core, establishing that feeling of we're stronger together if we help each other is actually really important. And what we've seen is the stronger communities are the ones that actually are the supportive ones. They're the ones where everybody works together, they're super well connected, and they are aligned around either a common goal or common mission, a common enemy, or a common value. And I think that's really powerful. And it's when the communities, when you start to see either the wing clipping happening or individuals sort of sucking up all the oxygen, then what it's actually doing is it's limiting the ability of that community to grow as great as it possibly can. And I think we see that,
And absolutely, what you're saying is that many people call whatever they are doing a community. And I just leave by saying it's not a community unless people feel at home to share and give first, unless they trust the system. Because when I give first to Anne, I don't expect Anne to give back to me and pay back in the same currency straight away. I give because, as you said, I trust the rising tide lifts all boats. And if I can see Anne happy, that will make me happy. And I trust the system. The system is the community. I trust that maybe I'll know that I'll get something back. Brad Feld says that. It's not about giving expecting nothing in return. It's about giving by trusting the system. And eventually Chris might give something super valuable to me that I didn't even expect. So it's not linear. It's network based. And it requires that sense of belief and culture of trusting that invisible net of trust, which is built by interactions. And it's beautiful. I think that it's a beautiful way of growing. And I think that's a beautiful way of living together. And the world needs it. And if you as a company are growing a community, I think you're doing something good to the world, and likely you're going to get more profit. So that's a great way to grow.
I think that's a great way to end. And I'm going to just pop in on two things there. One is we talk about our core values, and one of our core values is we go long. And it's exactly the work you do today and the work and where it goes. It may be a 2-year conversation, it may be a 5-year conversation, it may be never result in it. But the idea that you invest for the long haul in relationships, in activities, in cities, in all those things, I think is a really core tenet to what we believe is right. And I think you've summed it up by saying you've got to trust in the system. And a community is only as strong as whether or not the system can be trusted. And so building those trusted networks is really important. And the last thing I'll say is, now that I got to come back to the computer, saving it all up. I know, I'm like, oh. The last thing I'll say is, I think something we at Launchpad could action is, I love the thing that Lais started with, which was come together around shared values. It doesn't matter how diverse your perspectives or different things are, but if you actually have common values in hand, That's the thing that sort of is the common thread. And we're all looking for people who share our values. And I think what we should think about is one of our big core values is first believers. Mm-hmm. And so I could see us starting an initiative amongst our individual communities around how do we encourage each other and support each other in being each other's first believers. And we see first believer as we bet on a city, cities that nobody else will bet on. We bet on each other, and we bet on companies and founders, but our community itself can be betting on each other as well. And so I think that idea of first believers is something that we should tap into as a core value, because when you're on that journey of entrepreneurship, you need them.
I love that.
And they come, they're not the ones that are always going to be writing the checks, but they're the ones that are going to get you through those dark days.
I love the first believers concept. I think it's original and I can relate. I would feel part of it. So and it's daring. It's daring because we find it cute to be a pioneer, to be an early adopter, to be a first believer. But what it takes is really like starting from nothing sometimes. The city example is a great one. Being the first believers in a city that's not yet a startup ecosystem and daring to invest. And this is where I think I kind of get excited when things connect. That connects directly to your core value of the long haul, of like building relationships, because commitment is about being a first believer. You got to believe in something no one sees yet but you, and commit to it, which is building relationships, not transactions. And in essence, that's community building. So it's all aligned. It's like it's at the core of who you are, and it's beautiful.
All right, we got to trust the system.
All right.
Nice. Thank you so much for having me here. That was
great. It was so great to see you.
Nice to reconnect.
Either in Brazil or somewhere. I think we should.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca, for loving the conversation.
Thank you for being here, Rebecca.
Yeah.
I met Rebecca at the same web summit as I met you. So there you go.
Look at that.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Nice meeting all of you. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
We're gonna
visit me.
We killed it last week in Member Magic, so we're going to take a break this week from it. I mean, we had like 7 Member Magic.
I think we're going to be out of time. We'll save it up for next week.
Shoot. Okay. Well, we aren't going to be here next week. We're going to be dark.
Okay.
Sorry to disappoint, but we will be back the following week on Thursday, February 4th with Neil Suss, a CEO and Chief People Development Officer. Neil's core purpose is to provide people with the tools they need to reach their full potential and infuse mindfulness into all aspects of business growth.
I'm very excited to talk to him, and I think
you could use some mindfulness.
He will get us. He'll set us on a good path.
He sure will. Fun fact about Neil, and I'm going to save it for next week. Again, I'll repeat it. But fun fact about Neil. He, when his kids wanted to do screen time, he was like, great, if you meditate for 20 minutes, you can have screen time. And I was like, that is genius. So, because meditation is so wonderful.
They meditate together every day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Quick note, if you want to catch up on all of our past episodes, you can subscribe to us here on the LPTV programming channel, or subscribe and like our podcast, Lifestyle Business, which can be found wherever you get your podcast from.
All right.
Thanks for a great show with a Harper cameo.
Yeah, Harper cameo. Thanks for everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.